All right, welcome to Wednesday week. Gosh, what week is it for? Um, I'm going to share my video, share my screen with you, and I will do a quick, oops, and I'll do the intro to our next project. And I'm trying to get more of the readings up for you guys. So right now I have video versions of them, and so let me just get my screen share going on. Okay. So first of all, I just wanted to show you guys where the advertising project is. If you go to the modules and you scroll down, by the way, a couple little changes. I changed the Zoom link. I moved it up here into the Wednesday lectures and recordings. So you can always, guys can always find the Wednesday recordings here. And of course, I'll put the recorded ones underneath the Wednesday lecture link and recording. So down below here, down below Economic Foundations of Advertising, I used to have folks read through just the beginning of, let me show you this. Whoops, hold on. Okay. So now before anyone freaks out, I put in Karl Marx's Capital, okay? So before you start freaking out about socialism and communism and all the rest of it, one of the things that I wanted to, not you in particular, but one of the things in particular I wanted to bring to your guys' attention is that a lot of the criticism around advertising is framed in a way that critiques the processes and the forms of representation that are inherent in capitalism in order for it to work. He's not saying it's good or bad or whatever, but in Capital, which is a kind of a non-political, well, no, any document is non-political, but it's kind of a non-political document, oops, wrong one, where he lays out some of the foundational assumptions / observations that he makes about capitalism and about commodities in general. And in particular, the reason why I'm having you guys read this one is because I want you to read about some of the early notions about how commodities became sort of a currency. Like, we're used to calling ourselves consumers nowadays, and that didn't always used to be the case. So one of the things that in this very old-fashioned and out-of-date document does is it lays out, like, obviously it's not working, so it lays out some of the trappings that we assign to commodities in a capitalist economy. Blah blah. So apparently it's not working. Maybe I'm getting cut off by the there we go. So what I did was I put among the things that Marx talks about is he talks about something called the fetishism of the commodity. Now, one of the reasons why I'm having you read this is before anyone has an opinion about Marxism and socialism and all the rest of it, which is very popular in the news these days, and a tagline, you should probably understand what you're talking about before you, at least one would understand what they want to talk about before they begin to engage in a conversation about its merits. So one of the things that Marx talks about is he talks about use value and he talks about exchange value. And these are just simple precepts that still persist to this day, but they have morphed into something called logos and other things like that, where we're trying to figure out how do we assess value in commodities, in objects. And one of the things that he mentions is that he says that commodities, there was this mythical time once, back in the yonder days, which takes a little bit of imagination, before there were markets, and that there wasn't a place, I don't think, ever where there weren't markets, other than, say, perhaps like, you know, cavemen type days, but even they had something like bartering systems, where there's a disconnect between what we buy comes from and what we know about its origin. So, for example, if you get a present from someone like a friend or a parent or something like that, we know that it comes from somewhere very important. And that really informs how we value the object. So that's the inherent kind of value in the object. But what if that same object was given to somebody outside of your family? That person might not get all of the nuances and the connections and all that kind of stuff that you gave to it, or that one would give to it if it were their parent. And so how do you invent that? How do you invent that magical interplay between the meaning of the thing and the gap between somebody else who doesn't have that meaning in their own past? So one of the gaps of that Marx and others have identified is that advertising operates to fill the void between our gap in knowing where something comes from and what it signifies, or how it can signify meaning or value to us. And when you can convince people that that the value is higher than its actual sort of exchange kind of functional value, then that's when the commodity ends up becoming a fetish and becomes something that grows beyond its own function and usefulness. And you end up buying, for example, Nike shoes, Jordans or whatever. Now Jordans are just, they do the same thing, they protect your feet, but there are certain versions of Jordans that for one reason or another folks hang on their walls and they collect them and they're worth lots and lots of money. That's a commodity. And so just as the shoe that you ordinarily wear on your foot is a commodity, so too is the Jordan. But advertising has really played a huge role in whether or not the value of that commodity, the amount of money that we exchange for that commodity, advertising is responsible for the degrees and the intensities of how much that stuff is worth. So what I wanted to do today is to give you guys a brief history of advertising. And what we're going to do for our project is we're going to create a spoof ad. And I'll talk to you, and I have some student examples at the end of this that Kenna asked me to provide. Sorry, Kenna, but I will. I put some at the end of this so you guys have a better idea of what I'm expecting, or at least something that you guys can kind of vibe off of. Okay. I wanted to first lay out a premise, and the premise for the history of advertising comes from this mythical notion that there was once an authentic beginning where everything in our lives was traceable back to its source. So for example, we might have purchased some eggs instead of going to the market and not knowing that they came from a factory farm. We actually go to a person and we see that they have chickens and that those are the particular chickens that lay the eggs. And that's a more authentic, or at least viewed as a more authentic version of participating in the world, as opposed to just going to a store and collecting things that one needs to get on with whatever one has to do in order to keep shopping, which of course is earning money, right? And so Guy Debord was a guy who started a group called the Situationists International. And he was a cultural critic, a theorist, and in some ways a political activist. And he wrote a book called The Society of the Spectacle, where he began to look at, in a very metaphorical way, some of the presumptions that are present in a modern day democratic slash capitalistic environment. And really, I think at the root of the Situationists' questions had to do with, well, what are the political ramifications? What are the social ramifications? What are the personal ramifications of participating in this kind of a thing? As though any of us have a choice, really. But nonetheless, these are rare individuals who throw up these ideas out for thought, for question, right? I notice I have a little typo. Sorry, guys. So this is one of his many little aphoristic theses that he created. They're very dense and they're rich with signification. But what I'm going to do here is just show you one that I think is emblematic of how advertising operates at a sort of a philosophical level. In societies where modern conditions of production prevail, In other words, where factories and stuff like that are the big deal, right? We all go to work in a factory. All of life presents itself as an immense accumulation of spectacles. We'll talk about that in a minute. Everything that was once directly lived has moved away into representation. Now, this is a typically postmodern view of the world where we look at the world and we say, we have to read the world as signs of something else that it is not ordinarily revealing out front. And so one of the reasons why I put this out there for you guys is because I think it brings to attention to three big things. That number one, we live in a society where notions of production or like making stuff, selling stuff, that kind of thing, that's a very dominant part of our culture, right? And as such, we need to be convinced that it's a worthwhile endeavor to keep doing that, right? To keep going to work, to keep producing commodities to buy. And it's kind of a catch-22. We have to go to work at the factories or the businesses that create the services that provide the money for us to go back and participate in the very marketplace of those things that we're creating at work. We just have to trade money around in different spheres. It's a very simplistic way of looking at it. In the second part, all of life presents itself as an immense accumulation of spectacles. This has to do, in my opinion, about the disconnection that we sometimes have or face in a society where everything is obtainable or acquirable, and the only thing standing in our way, it's either like, the bootstrap idea where it's up to you to do it yourself, or you have to accumulate more wealth. But nonetheless, the spectacle has to do with the representation or the visual signifier that you have either succeeded or that you have a certain station in the culture. And then there was this, all in the very end, is all this lamentation about everything that was once directly lived has moved away into representation. And this is kind of a sad way of thinking about it. But in some respects, I think that more now than ever, we are living through representations of things like memes and so on, as opposed to living through directly collaboratively manufactured things in real life. However, I really feel like since the onset of COVID, the scope of what it means to live authentically has shifted. And I think one could argue that digital and virtual communication is as authentic as we give it permission to be, and that it's not necessarily any less authentic than being in real life. But there is something missed, and we're still wondering about that. So advertising starts out at its very early, and by the way, guys, this is based on social communications in advertising, which I have. I think I put it up on the Canvas page. If not, I will make sure it's up for you guys today. And it's a little bit boring, but it does give you kind of a good overview of the history of advertising, and gives you a sense. And what I'm trying to build here for you guys is a context that we can not only look at advertising as one of the dominant cultural expressions of our time, but that it didn't come from, we weren't just born into it, even though we might have been, but that it comes from somewhere, and that it had a history, and it had that history and the origins of its formations are rooted in historical, cultural, economic, all these kinds of really big meta level glacial movements. Okay, so as I go through this, I don't want you to think that this is a really standard way of looking at advertising, but I'm just going to try to give you like these big chunks per the reading, and give you some examples of how advertising's strategies have changed over the century, and I'll bring it all the way up into the present tense. So early on, these are some of the dominant techniques. You see that it's a rationalist endeavor, right? So and so makes one kind of a soap, and someone else makes another kind of soap. These two types of soap both do the same thing, but the role of advertising is to convince somebody who has a few pennies to spend on soap to give them to you as opposed to somebody else. In which case, what happens in the early stages is nobody wants to tell a lie. So they kind of do some tests and they go, look, our soap can wash a lamb or a sheep, and your soap can't even wash a hamster. Therefore, buy my soap. It's much more durable, right? And so more often than not, you see in these ads a very rational appeal to people, because there's a sense that people will make rational and common sense decisions about their stuff. However, as things go, the ads don't seek to like kind of, however, they don't, originally they don't seek to kind of, upend or tell lies or any of that kind of stuff. But as the little white lies start to grow and grow and grow, it starts to change the way advertising operates. So at first, it's very matter of fact. They're text heavy. Oftentimes, the pictures don't have any relationship to what is being advertised. They are very forthright. Again, thinking about, in this case is a Ford. You can imagine buying a car for $465. It was quite a lot of money back then, right? Compare and contrast was also a very big deal back then. And so it was informational primarily. And it wasn't, as we might think about now, it wasn't more manipulative. It was just sort of, here it is, take it or leave it. And so, for example, in this image, I don't know what a bear has to do with W.H. Andrews, but this is, an early version of, say, like the beginning of a mascot or a logo or something like that. So commodities, right? Things in the world that are useful primarily, and the compare and contrast between one company's hat and another person's hat has more to do with what your style is, what your income is, and that kind of thing. And this is an advertisement, obviously, just to get somebody into their shop. Another thing, though, we need to think about is that just as in the early part of the 20th century, people were also property. And so this is from the 1850s, and this is a lost slave advertisement. So one important thing to remember is that as we talk about commodities, we're not just talking about stuff, we're also talking about people, for at least until the middle of the 20th century. And that is nothing that is small. And I'll come back to it later. However, one of the main takeaways from this very early phase of advertising is that it's really rational, it's really kind of compare and contrast. And then you have this sort of like, almost like a book report of why one thing's better than another thing. Okay, so there's no, it's just simply the bike, it's the car, it's a person, it's, just showing you the facts, people. And because you're smart, you're going to make the right choice. As things move on in the history of advertising, something big happens right in between the earliest phase and this phase 2, and we'll talk about that next in the propaganda section. During World War I, there was a really large impact of trying to get the United States into World War I. And they had allies and all this kind of treaties that they needed to honor. But Woodrow Wilson, who was a very isolationist type figure, not quite like a Trump figure, but a very isolationist figure. He ran and got elected to the presidency in the early teens of the 20th century, and he promised that he wouldn't get involved in all these wars that the Europeans were doing, but unfortunately they had to. And part of what they did was they created an enormous propaganda machine that would convince and demonize the Austro-Hungarian Empire for the American public, so that they can get the American public's support. Because when the constituency of an American public supports a particular thing, it's easier to get senators and Congress people to vote for it as well. But we'll cover that in propaganda. So this is post-World War one, and that's not a small thing. That's a big, big thing. But one of the things that shifts between the more rationalist, you know, version of advertising is that suddenly you start getting these associative relationships between like the object that's being advertised and then the stories that go around it. And most of these are abstract kind of social relationships. The brand of a product, it's sort of important, but it's not like we think of brands now. The brand of a product was still attached to its track record of quality, and it was not attached to the accrual of, say, like a logo is now. So the brand of the product is still important, but the form of the ads begin to attribute different qualities through symbolic relationships in the product setting, and I'll show you some examples of that. The focal point here is now shifting away from the original object or commodity as just an independent thing that you can make up your decision on your mind. This is your bike, that's your butter, whatever. But it's more about what type of person are you? And do you, as that type of person, jive with this product? And so there's more of a psychological bent to it. And that is in direct relationship to a lot of the propaganda that was produced, or at least the propagandistic ideologies that were producing advertising and political campaigning in the 19-teens up until 1919 into the 20s. More often than not, it's an abstract thing. It's more like an art piece, really, and it's and it really tries to again fill that gap visually between, say, one. So, for example, as the qualities of products begin to become closer and closer in terms of their potential, like one one makeup cream and another makeup cream, they pretty much do the same thing, but what you have to do is you have to oversell that small difference, and in the way that you do then that small difference is the gap that you want to occupy with your advertising. Okay, so the reader of these ads, they fill it in visually, right, and it relies heavily on like metaphor, a lot of the things that we talked about when we were going over advertising, visual literacy, right? So metaphor, juxtaposition, symbolic representations, illusions, and so on. Okay. So here's an ad for Philip Morris. They make cigarettes, and in here it's kind of it's almost like comically obvious. So you have and by the way, race and gender roles are not only enforced, but they're also in some ways recast in the world of advertising. And so you can't help inhaling, but you can help your throat. So when you hear about how early cigarette manufacturers were sued over the claims for health, this is one of the ads that contributed to that. Another thing here is that televisions were very, very expensive, and they were very rare back in the 1930s. And so to have a television was sort of like, would be equivalent to like, someone looking at a hologram or something right now, watching television, like, moving things virtually with their hands or having Google Glass or whatever. So they're really trying to put up their cigarettes up along the lines of this high-tech modern age. So you're not only really smart, you're obviously wealthy because you can afford a television, and there's a bellhop or some kind of a servant man there. And the Philip Morris boy is saying, hey, it's not only what the rich and the powerful do, but it's also something that you can do. And if you're not, even if you're not rich, it'll help your throat, right? Okay, so again, this is for telecasting today, right? Chrysler. So you see happy family here. They have leisure time. They can go out, get a thrill. I think this is a cutoff. I don't think that it meant to have a woman's bust in there. I think there's actually more to the ad which got cut off. This is again, this is sort of, this is a cross between that first stage where it's like super hyper rational and the new stage. So on the one hand, you have this association of happy people This fellow looks like he's smoking a pipe or something. They're watching a television, and DuPont, as a plastics company, is advertising how ubiquitous their product is by simply showing you, here's what you do and here's what we do that makes this happen, right? So you can see it's almost like these are little snapshots of what you can do with the stuff, or what typical people will be doing with this kind of product. Health and freshness comes in cans, so that was great. If you have any doubt. Cigarette companies, again, they were hard pressed to sell the cancer stick all over the place, so they really bumped up the vibe around cigarettes and the culture around cigarettes. Kodak camera, Eastman Kodak a long time ago began to create portable photography, and they needed a market for this. These were expensive things. They were specialized. You had to send your stuff away, take it to a lab to get it done. You had to wait. So it was a real investment. And so in order to substantiate that investment, they had to couch that investment in something that was more valuable than the money that went into the camera itself, which of course is memories, right? Making memories and then being with your loved ones. And so right there, what you have is you have an associative relationship between the object, which is here. Let me go back if I can. What's typical of this kind of an ad is that you have the product is in the midst of a situation, and sometimes what they do is they'll show you how to use the object in that situation, right? So for example, if you just open a can, it looks just as good as everyday food. But what they're doing right here is they're situating the product as a kind of an actor in a little mini imagination movie that is an ad. And by doing so, what they're doing is they're hoping to glom onto some of the values that we might associate with this, like a mother. It looks like a mother and a daughter. I don't know. It could be her aunt. It could be her older sister. Who knows? But I'm just assuming it's a mother and a daughter, and then the daughter's holding the little camera, and that's a precious moment, right? Same here. Going to the beach was a big deal. It was something that that the wealthy did, and so right there we're looking at a class-based advertising scheme. And I think in many respects, Kodak knew that there's not that many people that can afford these machines, and so we might as well market to the people who we know have the means to buy them. The other thing that's interesting here is that they're showing how to use the camera in a situation. So it's situational. So whereas before you just had the basic image of the object and some stats about it, now you have the object in action, right? And so not only do you see the thing being showing you how to use it, or how typically these fancy people use it, but that you could put yourself in there too, right? You could occupy that very place. Again, there's not a clean line between one phase and another, but here again, this is a more old-fashioned one. It still has this sort of relational thing. It's clearly geared toward women, based upon the look and feel of the hands, and of course there are all these other kind of spurious kind of claims that it will make about beauty and all that kind of thing. This one's kind of emblematic of what this phase is all about, and it has to do with the associative power of objects or environments around the commodity. So right here we have the cream, the face cream, and around it there's a rose. It looks like there's crystals, there's pearls, there's lace, there's some kind of a dreamy backdrop. So while it doesn't really show us who uses Pond's cream, it shows us by default who uses Pond's cream by showing us the stuff that that particular person might have on their nightstand or in their, their makeup table. And it's not everybody who can afford pearls and all this kind of cut glass and have fresh flowers all the time. And so clearly what they're doing here is they're right here, as you can see, they're appealing to the loveliest women in society. This is just silly. I don't know. This guy's on his early riding lawnmower, right? What's also really cool is to look at the future, the past version of the future. So you know, this is light and power companies looking to the future. Still haven't reached that part. Okay. So phase 3 is the commodity personalized. So you can think about number 1, phase 1 is kind of rational, you know, just the facts, people. Phase number 2 is more associative and environmentally, kind of, not environmentally, but I guess like juxtapositionally, like all the stuff that's in the image are used as signifiers. Remember, we talked about what signifiers do and metaphors and all that kind of thing. So the objects in those ads are metaphors. Here, the object is personalized, and this is post-World War II, and things have changed a bit. This phase is known for its direct relationship between a product and the human personality, defining the framework of the ad, and that's really important. So this is shortly after. I think the star system in Hollywood started in like the late teens or early 20s. And so you really have this kind of growing, established notion about stardom and about celebrity and about power and all this kind of thing. And so in these ads, the people are explicitly interpreted in relationship to the world of the commodity, right? So the commodity already exists in its own kind of amazing world. And these people are yet one more accoutrement that they can put into their ads to show how, to paint that kind of social area or arena wherein that product is living. So what we look for in these ads is not who's in it per se, but stuff like how do they feel about it? Is there a pride in owning it? Are they worried about it? Like, are they satisfied? You know, are they smiling and that kind of thing, right? And it's based on the idea that we decide how to relate socially to one another, based first on our ability to identify similarities and differences through visible cues, right? So these are, we look at these ads and we go, oh, I can relate to that. I have that thing, or I go to the beach, so they're doing that, right? I know it seems really obvious and old, but it's just the history of where things have come from. And so what ends up happening is the commodities in those ads operate as extensions of that signification system, right? So they're not the thing itself. They're signifying something like beauty or wealth or social status, right? So previously, you know, separate worlds of people and products, they pretty much merged. I am what I wear, right? So this is where we start to absorb the signified values of a particular commodity as it's been advertised. So here we go. So the people in the ad have kind of become emblems of the product. The people in the ads also become emblems of sexist and patriarchal norms. Right? Again, another little bit of patriarchy going on here. But it's not about what the beer does, it's about where the beer is. Okay. Now, the large ice, there were many reports that there were subliminal messages in the ice because people had become really worried. Not worried, but I guess they became suspicious of the power of images because it seemed to operate on a subconscious level. So there's no person in this, but the person is implied through the things, just as that earlier one with the pond cream was implied through the pearls and the cut glass. So what's interesting in these ads is that the situation, let's go back, the situation that these things are depicting are almost contingent upon the presence of the commodity, right? So being cool like this dude, or being thrilled like this woman here on the beach, being admired by a fellow over there. These are almost as though that whole situation wouldn't have happened without the cigarette in their hand or a car that they're driving, right? So while these things just might seem kind of innocuous, what they're doing visually is they're inculcating us into reading the commodity or the presentation of the commodity as the fulcrum upon which a situation is good or bad. Pivots on, right? One of the ways to think about this phase of advertising, I like to think of it as kind of associative or metonymic, right? Where the bringing up of one thing, because of its associations, has you thinking about associations rather than whether or not the thing itself is that association. You just ball up all the joy and all the wealth and the privilege here around Coca-Cola, and the other emblem, the other part of this era of advertising is that the commodity or the thing that they're selling kind of fades into the background. It's sort of just like a prop. And then you start realizing it's not just a prop, it's actually the reason why the whole thing is there in the first place. So I'm going through Coke. I'm using Coke because they're one of the more advanced users of this technique. And you can see how diminished the actual object is in the ad as compared to the situation in the ad, right? Apple computers took a page out of early Coke advertising, by the way. I'll show you some of that later. So the next phase that advertising moves in, so we're going from the late 19th century up through the First World War into the 30s, post-World War II, and I know that's a lot of history to go by, but now let's start looking at like 1960s and beyond. And if you guys watched Mad Men, this is some of this may or may not seem familiar, but the Mad Men kind of thing was one of those cliche representations of this ad men at this time. And this phase can be described as a combination of the last two phases. It merges on multiple levels, not in any kind of a systematic way, I think, overall, but systematic in particular, say, for one ad company or another, right? So image and commodity as person, right? That's really key. It relies on stereotypes about what we presume about people in social interactions or in public, right? Do they look friendly? Do they look nice? Do they look unhappy? So on. And so what we do is we start to read these social cues based upon the actors in the ad as signs of an affiliation with the actual group and by proxy the commodity itself. And the act of consuming the actual thing is usually behind the scenes, or it's incidental, right? So it links the consumption to an appropriate setting and situation rather than just, this is a really great beverage to quench my thirst, it's better than water, right? And it's not merely enough to consume the product, you also have to consider the way that you do that. So what ends up happening here is there's a real shift between, or at least an attempt to shift our notions of what we might associate with a particular product into actually absorbing it into a kind of a lifestyle understanding, right? And this is really the beginning of logo, the logosphere, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so these are usually like lifestyles, and they're depicted so that we can insert ourselves into the scene. So it's what they're trying to do is that they're trying to get you, the consumer, to fill in the gaps. They're trying to get you to complete the circle. They're going to get you most of the way there, but they want you to complete that circle. And they also convey a relationship by situating the commodity directly into an activity that indicates a certain slice of life of that style, right? So first of all, we need that signifier of something like romantic. Think back to that Coca-Cola ad where young people are just like going to a prom or something, or they're having a cute date or whatever they're doing, with all of the attendant sociocultural lack therein. but they're doing it and it's become situated in there. So what we do is we end up looking at these people as a symbol of a typical ideal version of like romance or fun or athleticism, right? Or a day at the beach, okay? And so what it also does is it ends up kind of codifying people in terms of types. I'm a this kind of person, I'm a that kind of person, right? The commodity lifestyle in the lifestyle ads is a dimension of consumption that provides a unifying framework, sorry for the typo, of interpretation, so that it gives you not only the object or the commodity that you have to purchase, but it also gives you social cues on how to act when you have it, okay? So for example, that's the subtle but significant change here. It's a psychological shift where we're moving from the image as a representation of, number one, just a logical, here's what this thing does compared to other things. And now it's, if you're more like this person than not, you're more likely to use this product. Because what we're doing here is these ads are now attempting to give us a setting into which we might put ourselves in and associate with the product's use or acquisition, right? And again, looking at gender roles and the representation of what's normal is very subtextual, and now it looks like it's very overt. Marge, she was a big thing when I was a kid. I'm sure no one, Madge, sorry, Madge. This is just ridiculous. Hai karate. It's not even worth paying attention. Okay, so the last sphere. So what's happening is the commodity over time, the actual thing that you buy, has started to recede in importance or presence in the advertisements that are created to sell it, okay? And it went so far to the point now where when, say, we go back here and we see these kinds of lifestyle type of images where this person has a gigantic dog on a yacht, or you're just a working person, but no problem, you've got this thing going on under your armpit, which makes you safe. What it's doing is it's taking the commodity and it's removing it from a situation and foregrounding the situation that the commodity happens to be a part of, right? And so that's a little bit like, oh, come on, it's sort of like everyone's doing it. That's kind of how I like to think about it. And so the logo sphere is a sphere where whereas before, in say the 19th and early 20th century, you had a direct association and a development of, say, like you might call Kleenex, tissue paper Kleenex. Well, that's a really easy one that we can refer to as the kind of combination of a brand of a product with the product itself. So if you can start to get that kind of thing, get me a Kleenex or get me a this, then you end up sort of becoming a part of that product's life history. Now, there used to be a direct connection between the quality of a product and the brand that made it. So for example, Nike at one point actually did create shoes that were for runners. But slowly but surely, Nike began to move away from that and start to have a little logo, a little swoosh logo, which was on their shoes. And then instead of that signifying simply great footwear, what it ended up signifying was a type of person that bought those products, okay? And so what Nike ended up doing is they ended up focusing not on the product, but ended up focusing on the development of the logo as an embodiment of a quality or an embodiment of certain aspects of a life that one who, perhaps if you have those aspects or if you have those qualities, to have a Nike shoe or perhaps to have an Apple computer makes it obvious that you are one of those people. And therefore what Nike ended up selling, just as what Apple ended up selling later, was less and less about the quality of a product and more about how we think about that product. So the mind space is what is being sold in the logosphere, not the thing itself. And what's fascinating about the logosphere is that it's what's happening now. Memes are more memes, and like TikTok and that kind of stuff. Those are sort of the latest manifestations of this logosphere type of an approach to communication. And what I mean by that is that the Apple, so this is after Steve Jobs, this is after he got kicked out, I think, and came back. So he had to restart Apple because it had become synonymous with really crappy computers. So he pretty much lost any credibility whatsoever, right? But so he had to reinvent how to market computers. And I'll talk a little bit about the Apple Store in a minute. But what happens here is that the logo, this little Apple thing, Think Different, as their campaign, is an older campaign. If you don't know, that's Yoko Ono and John Lennon from the Beatles, right? Yoko Ono was a performance artist in her own right. She did not break up the Beatles, okay? Jim Henson, right? So Think Different. So there's no computer anywhere in these ads. Absolutely nothing. All you have are these images that are tugging at maybe a nostalgia or some notion of brilliance or some notion of genius. And so this thing right here, the logo ends up becoming a referent to values first, and by association, products. And so it's a way of portably moving your product association around. So Apple could very well make hats, stickers. They could make anything with their ads. Same with Nike, and they have done that. They have used the logos that they put on everything. They can sell anything with the Nike logo, a cup, coffee. It doesn't really matter. It's no longer linked to its origin. While Benetton was an Italian fashion clothing manufacturer, and they started an ad campaign in the 80s that was kind of on the cusp of logo identification. And so one of the first stages of logo identification is making a big hit. And one of the things that they did was they started to create these ads which were visually very intense. This is an ad that really got I think it was banned in the United States, but it played continually, like in parts of Europe and in South America. And the thing is that this image of having a wet nurse, or connoted back in the days when slavery was legal in the US, and there were wet nurse slaves who breastfed white babies. So this had a very, very sensitive cultural association that the United States chose to omit instead of say, yeah, that's us. But nonetheless, United Colors of Benetton is here. To say nothing about, so again, it relies on stereotypical and conventional ideas, right? So in this case, the African-American child, the black child has horns, and the white child has this kind of cherubic kind of locks, which is in and of itself a very cliche and old, tired method of representing color in race. But nonetheless, Benetton's tacking its name to it. So the shock value of these ads really hit home with people. And it was part of, this man is dying of AIDS, by the way. And so it was this sort of unabashed kind of use of real world pain, suffering, cultural boundaries being pushed. And all they did, they did it on purpose, and they inserted their logo into there, okay? Budweiser, there's no beer anywhere in this ad. It's the same thing. It appeals to sexism, male patriarchy, whatever you want to say, people who are into motorcycles. And there's a direct gaze from the female person out into the world of the viewer, right? So you're being directly addressed. But there's no object. There's nothing to purchase. Or again, you have this, it's situational, right? So we start to read what people are doing in the ad before we look at what they're holding. This is a really famous one where Marlboro became really famous for the Marlboro Man, which was the sort of hyper-masculine cowboy figure riding around horses or flying helicopters and that kind of thing. And of course, smoking Marlboro, because the rugged dude always smokes the simplest cigarette, I suppose. And as such, since there was such an association created with cowboys and cigarettes through the Marlboro Company, pretty soon they didn't even need to show their logo at all. All they needed to do was show the desert, because they had co-opted the desert as a part of the symbolic reference to their product for a while. Okay. This is a really old ad, but it's from when the iPod came out, and it mixed with Abu Ghraib. Okay. So this is a spoof ad, you guys. This is a way of taking an existing ad strategy and inserting something for, say, a political point of view, or playing around with expectations. These are some more examples, you guys, student examples. This is an ad for Yellowtail Chardonnay. So in your projects, what you guys are going to do is create a spoof ad. You're going to be doing some research on the product. I don't want you guys to tell any lies about something, but this, for example, is an opinion from one of the college students at CSU Monterey that I was teaching at, and they noticed that this was a relatively cheap wine for students to buy, and it ended up, with a kind of party culture and that kind of thing. Being plugged into your earbuds was also big on their agenda. This was beautifully done. You can see this guy's about to get whacked. These people here are visibly like, oh no, and then there's a dark sky. So all that stuff was put in, and then the whole image was kind of homogenized by the use of a filter, which created a kind of a cutout and posterized look. So that's a trick you guys can use when you're doing your ads. This is a Taco Bell ad. This was a part of a flash animation, but nonetheless it had to do with the global dependence upon produce and links between fast food and produce. And this is Taco Bell. It might be difficult to see, but there are little ghosts of diamonds back in here and diamond rings. And this is a direct reference to the De Beers Diamond Company. A diamond is forever. And if many of you may know about a diamond being representative of a symbol for love or promise. If you were to get married with someone, you give them a diamond ring, and that's your promise that you're going to still marry them in a week or two. But that was created by the De Beers Company, which was a Dutch mining company. And you may or may not have seen the Blood Diamond movie that was done, I think, in the early 90s, maybe late 80s. But De Beers, there is apparently not as much of a shortage of diamonds as we think. But that De Beers put because they had a monopoly on diamond extraction, they put the squash on how much diamonds are in the world, much like OPEC does for oil. And so they invented the entire campaign around the diamond as a symbol of for matrimony or for having a fiance. They invented that in the 1920s. And so that whole kind of embodied notion about a diamond ring as an engagement ring has been completely invented and perpetuated through culture, but it was invented by the De Beers Company. Aquafina, this is, it's more of a kind of a metaphor where we're putting together different, this idea of nature, but in fact it's encapsulated in a plastic bottle. And so this student wanted to make something kind of pastoral, but also kind of sad. So this is a really, like in a really old 19th century kind of impressionist type painting of factories. And I suppose we're supposed to presume that the water is kind of rotten. Again, this is, this had to do with the addiction to sugars and the proliferation of candies among children, right? So this is a relatively simple move, but if you're going to do a project like this, you need to also have the research behind it so that I can read like really what's behind it, or where you just, because it's kind of easy to tick people off. And I want you guys to understand that if you're going to tick people off, I'm not going to stop you from doing it, but you're going to take your lumps on it. So I want you to, if you're going to tick people off, don't do it on purpose. Let it be something that's more incidental. Be sincere about what you're going to do. This was a critique of autotune. Lil Wayne. My voice is horrible from all the, oh, that's, and there's, you know, these, some of these ads are tongue in cheek, of course. This is when cell phones were starting to get really small, and how ridiculous, how people, this is also at a time, some of these are quite old, but I've been doing this class for a while, but some of these ads are, this had to do with the all-in-onceness of phones. And in fact, that has come to pass, right? This one here is really interesting. This is a Prius ad. And when the Prius and hydrogen cars and all these kinds of, you know, alternative energies were coming around, there was a lot of debate about whether or not it was really making a difference, because we were still relying upon gas-powered vehicles, gas and diesel-powered ships to move these supposedly clean energy items from one market to another. So this student, who kind of very subtly kind of knocked the opacity down on the G, just to give us even more of a clue, was that they really noticed that, well, trying to create something that's like carbon neutral takes carbon in the first place. And so until we get over the ability to make carbon-free items without using carbon, then really what are we doing? Are we just doing this in name only? Is it a style statement, right? Let's see, if this is
Were
about
you an
ugly
ugly baby? Pudgy face, splotchy complexion, invisible eyebrows, undefined lips? Are you worried about your baby having to endure the same torment? Now you don't have to. Introducing Makeup for Babies. We have a full line of beauty-enhancing products, including foundation, blush, and lipstick, to keep your baby from having to experience the torment of being an ugly child. Makeup for Babies, because your child's looks are a reflection on you.
So that one's kind of obvious. In other words, you don't have to have. You can pick a commodity. You can also pick a company. I think that's it, guys. You can also pick a company that participates in a particular practice that you don't like. That, for example, there was one year that a student did something on Johnson & Johnson's baby lotion, which was apparently banned in the UK for possibility of cancer. And there's a lot of things that are going to go under the radar, but I do want you guys to do some research on your advertisement. I'd like you to read there's going to be a couple of readings and some screenings. There are already some screenings in our Canvas page, and our Canvas page, let me see if I can head it up for you guys. I just wanted to show you the Canvas page and where I've put stuff so you guys can get to it and see what we're doing. Let me get my share going on. Okay. So here, I just wanted to show you that down below in the module section is below visual fluencies. Here is the Karl Marx thing that you can read, and it's actually kind of cool. It talks about, he kind of really lays out some of the really old-fashioned fundamentals of economic commodities. And the Mystery of Capital is really interesting. This is a reading by a guy named Hernando de Soto, who is a Peruvian economist. He's a capitalist, and one of the questions that he asked, and this is, I'll show you my cards on this because I wanted I'm making the argument to you guys in this class that advertising, it revolves around a number of things, not just wealth, but also the role of representation. And so if we can abstract, say, wealth or power or beauty or any of those success into representations, then those representations can be put together with an object or a commodity. And those associations create a third thing, which is your interest in buying it. And once that happened, and we're already used to that, we no longer need the commodity to be present. All we need is just the signifier of the company, like Virgin Records or Nike or Apple or whatever, right? and a situation, and suddenly those two things, this corporation and then this set of values, say like Jim Henson or the Beatles, they come together, and then all of a sudden we have this kind of an odd combo of two different realities, but we associate it inevitably with whatever those people make. So the advertising project is here, you guys. I want you to know that next Wednesday, if you want to upload a preview, you can upload a preview, and I'll give you guys direct feedback in class or after, and then the final will be due that following Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So not this Sunday, but the next Sunday, this will be due. So there's options to this. The first option is to create a spoof ad, and I do have some. You guys can go to adbusters.com if they're still around, but you can see some spoof ads. If you want to create a meme, you can try and do that around a commodity. That's totally legit. But a spoof is a visual form of satire. So you're making a cultural or a political or an economic commentary on something. You can't. A spoof is not just to insult somebody's thing because you don't like it. That is not very intelligent, and it's not actually useful. So, for example, if you hate the smell of lavender, that's not enough for you to do a spoof ad on something. You've got to do something a little bit richer, like maybe if you looked into the production of fake lavender and its impact on the environment or that kind of thing, then you might have something there that you can reach further down into. But being topical like that's not going to cut it. So find out where the thing came from. It's right here. Just try and do some research. Where did it come from? Who makes it? What else do they make, right? Like, for example, Monsanto, what do they make, right? What are the values of the company? How do you know the values? You can also go on companies' websites and look at their, sometimes what they'll have is they'll have an investor area where you can go and they will track who goes there. And you can read about who their investors are, where their investments are, and sometimes they'll say if they want to be shady about it, please contact us for more information. Are there other subsidiaries? Are there other companies that rely upon this? Okay. And then you're going to create an ad that uses Photoshop and InDesign, and I'll create for you guys some little mini tutorials for InDesign. You don't have to use InDesign, but you could use it if you want. I'll give you guys that option. But Photoshop or your digital imaging editing software of choice is whatever you'll use. If that's GIMP, it doesn't matter. And in other words, and your project has to be more than like just picking on something that you hate or that got under your skin one time, or substituting something like, okay, got milk or got this or got that. That's the kind of easy way out. And so doing that kind of thing can be used, but it's got to go beyond just the surface reading, okay? You can also scan or photograph existing media that you find in magazines or whatever. Most of you will probably default to the web. Who buys magazines anymore, right? And then the other thing I'd like you guys to do is when you guys do your image search, if you're using Google, make sure you go into the tools and select image size and try to get the largest images you can of the ad. One of the ways spoof ads work is that they operate as a doorway of familiarity to begin with. Let me see if I can go to going to adbusters.org for you guys. Okay. Adbusters has been around for a while. It's a cool site. They're always topically relevant. Read through it. They've really kind of shifted from a spoof ad manufacturing thing, and it's become much more sophisticated. But they do have a variety of approaches that they use. And so, for example, in your spoof ad, what you can do is you can use the strategies that are familiar to people. So, for example, let's say, I don't know, it was a Super Bowl ad, or it's a meme or something like that, where you guys are just tapping into a shared understanding or a shared experience as a setting. You can do that as a setting, but you can't just use that shared experience and do pretty much the same exact meme except with a different cast of characters. That's not going to work. Those cast of characters have to make a comment on the original thing, okay? You can also do, the other thing too is you're going to create a one-page written document where you're going to talk about the research that you did, where you went, what you found out, just like a annotated bibliography. And also the bibliography of where you got your images, if you can, okay? You may also do a video if you so choose. I'm going to ask that you guys just use some basic video editing software like Windows Movie Maker, or like, you know, any kind of a video production app on your phone. Try to avoid ones that are those filters that come from, you know, like, I don't know, does anyone use Facebook anymore, or Instagram, or any of those kind of things? Try to avoid using those things, because what ends up happening is those filters become the first point of contact in the content of what you're doing. And so if I look at that filter, I'm like, oh great, they're using a filter to talk about something else. That something else has to be more powerful than the filter in order for you to use it. So for example, if you're going to make an ad talking about ice cream and you're using Mickey Mouse, well, first of all, Mickey Mouse as a cultural icon is much, much broader and bigger and more powerful than what you think about ice cream. And so we won't help but wonder what you're talking about when it comes to Disney. And if you say, oh no, I just wanted to use Mickey Mouse because he's, you know, Mickey Mouse, I like Mickey Mouse and I like ice cream, those two things don't necessarily go together. But if, for example, the Disney Corporation had outlawed your favorite, as an example, had outlawed your favorite, you know, ice cream brand because of corporate decisions or whatever, or maybe the ice cream that they have is created in countries where they don't support human rights or something along those lines, hypothetical, not real, then there you have a story to tell, right? But simply using the kind of image and star power of somebody else's ad campaign is not sufficient for you to say whatever you want. It's got to be linked. Okay? Basic resolution, 300 DPI. That's so we can probably print some of these, and I'll see if I can get those out to you guys. At least 10 inches by 10 inches. That'll give me a little bit of wiggle room to upsize later. It'll also give you room to resize one for your website, which you'll post. And again, I ask, you don't have to, but I ask if you guys can please upload a copy to Canvas. If not, I will override the grade, and I'll make sure if it's on your blog, then that's fine too. With regard to the video, 15 to 60 seconds, or however long it needs to be. So for example, making a longer video is not always better. Shorter videos, just like writing essays and poems, are very difficult because of how much you have to really hone in on what you're saying. So if you do a video, or if you do an image, I just really want you guys to focus in on what is your main thing, right? Kind of try to say it to yourself. I think this hand cream is bad because they tested on lizards or something, right? The written analysis. This is the details about, whoops, I have a little typo in here. It's not March 13th. This will be due on the, I'll correct this. This will be due on October 3rd, sorry. So, and then more of the information about if you guys choose to do a, you know, what kind of image you want, video, web-based. I did have a student do a web-based project where they did a ad campaign for the gubernatorial race when Gray Davis was recalled, and they made an eBay page with all the different candidates, and it wasn't just you know, one group or another. It was all stripes, and there were certain amounts of money that you could use to purchase these different candidates, and among them were Arnold Schwarzenegger. So, oops. So guys, that's what I've got for you for this project. I would like you guys to, I'm going to update this, save. I also did want to show you back in our Canvas page where I've put the advertising. So here I have, these are kind of cool, the ad and the ego. It's a little bit old fashioned, but it does talk a lot about what I went over today with regard to, hopefully that'll work, guys. All right, I have to make sure this thing's going to open for you. But this is a really cool little documentary about the origins of advertising, but I'll make sure it works. And I may end up just finding a link for you guys on YouTube. And then the no logo is from Naomi Klein. I've also put a PDF of the reading here. Naomi Klein is a journalist and wrote early on about the development of brands like Virgin Records, Nike, you know, Claiborne, all these different ads. So it's a really interesting look at how corporations can absorb and take over cultural, authentic cultural movements and create versions of them that we all can relate to. So I just want you to know. There'll be 2 other readings in there for you guys to review. So if you want, check that out first. Review the project prompt. And if you guys want to check in with me next Wednesday, that's great. I'd love to see what you're doing. I definitely want to see at least something, a little idea, a little something that you can either put up in Canvas, or you can just show me via Zoom on next Wednesday. All right. So that's it. Any questions? Jasmine, do you have any questions? If you're still there. Oh, you can't talk because of your thing. Okay. Well, in any case, let me see if I can unshare, see if you have anything in the chat. Oh, good grief. All right. Okay, there we go. All right. All right, cool. Okay, so I will see you guys next Wednesday. Definitely email me with any updates. I'm going through your bloopers. They look rad and awesome. I love them. I appreciate all the work that you guys put into it. I know some of you had some troubles getting it in. That's no problem. If you guys run into anything like life stuff or whatever, just let me know. No worries, and we'll work something out, okay? All right, I'll see you guys later.